Who we are, who we were, and who we're destined to become are all reflections of the stories we tell, of gods and devils, from tales of the heart to those of fear and foreboding. Stories shape us and the world we live in. Myths, folk tales, and even religious parables all define our cultures and beliefs. In each episode of Faith and Fear, we will dip our toes into the comparative narratives spanning the globe, considering the concepts and archetypes common to us all. Enle Shalom and Prazir. Hello and peace. It's a pleasure. Thank you for following me down the rabbit hole once again on my journey to better understand the stories and beliefs that shape us. In one of his short stories, Edgar Allan Poe said, "Believe nothing you hear and only one half that you see." In the tradition of oral storytelling, this week I want to spend a little time here on the home front and take a deeper dive into American folklore. The folklore here in the United States generally originated from stories of indigenous pre-settler tribes like the Wendigo from last week, or tales of early European immigrants centered around myths of the founding. These expanded to tall tales, a fundamental part of early American literature and culture. Stories born of settlers and frontiersmen, creating from bragging contests and exaggerations of events that actually occurred. Most of these types of stories found their prime during the American Old West and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Real-life figures became heroes. People like Daniel Boone, an American pioneer and explorer, Davy Crockett, a frontiersman, soldier, and politician, or even John Henry, known as the Steel Driving Man, a legendary African-American railroad worker. The next evolution of such stories bore fictional characters who were even larger than life. Heroes like the Masked Lone Ranger, the twister-riding cowboy Pecos Bill, and the giant lumberjack Paul Bunyan. These legends shaped our young country in many ways and largely made our nation what it is today. But there are other stories, likely less known, but whose characters and narratives are just as deeply a part of what made this country and its people who they are. Some are reflected in superstitions and local beliefs, while others have gone on to influence popular culture and animated icons. Native American myths and folktales vary greatly from all parts of the country. Many tribes have different stories with different explanations for the world around us, some of which have gone on to influence national landmarks and the like. Crow Brings Daylight is an Inuit folktale centered around the protagonist Crow, who first describes to the Inuit people that he has, in fact, seen daylight. The world was still new and the Inuit people lived in darkness, so this was something they had not yet experienced. Crow was known to travel back and forth between the north and the south, but even when he told them what he had seen, they did not want to believe him. Eventually, their desire for this light grew, and they begged the elderly Crow to retrieve it for them. He finally agreed to make the long journey south, growing tired many times along the way. Resting in a tree near a village, Crow turned himself into a speck of dust, landing in the fur of a young girl's cloak he'd been watching. He traveled to her home where he floated into the ear of a little boy. While in the boy's ear, he convinced the boy that he wanted to play with a ball of light Crow saw kept in a glowing box in the corner. The father wanted to appease his son, so complied, tying a string to the ball and gave it to him. Crow then whispered to the boy that he wanted to play outside, so the father picked him up and carried him out. As soon as they had left the lodge, Crow escaped the child's ear, returning to his true form before grabbing the ball and string, flying away. He carried the glowing ball of light back to the Inuit people, dropping it on the ground, and as it shattered, it released the daylight. The Inuit people rejoiced. However, Crow informed them this light would not last forever. The small ball he obtained would only last for 6 months and would need to rest and regain its strength. So for 6 months, they would enjoy daylight, and for the other 6, they would have to live in darkness. The Maid of the Mist is a Native American legend of the Niagara River. One version goes that after losing her husband and all hope at a young age, consumed by sorrow, a beautiful maiden traveled the river in her canoe singing a death song to herself before going over the falls. However, she was saved by Hino, the god of thunder, who took her to his home nearby. She stayed with Hino and his sons, eventually marrying the youngest, and those two eventually bared a son. Happy for the most part, the maiden still longed to see her family. After a great snake arrived, poisoning the waters of her people, they grew sick and began dying. Hino warned her and took her to warn her people in turn that the snake would come to eat those it had killed with its poison. The people evacuated, and when the snake arrived, it became enraged to see the village had been deserted. It began rampaging before Hino eventually killed it with a single mighty thunderbolt. Unfortunately, its body floated downstream, blocking the river and causing it to flood their home. Hino, the maiden, and the rest of their family were able to evacuate, making a new home in the clouds above the Great Falls, where they still watch over her people. Legend says that Hino's thundering voice can still be heard and echoes over the misty sky of the falls. In a myth about fire, Bear was the original owner. It provided him and his people warmth and light as needed. One day, Bear and his friends got caught up enjoying the bounty of acorns they had found, traveling through the forest eating, leaving the fire Bear had set burning behind them. Eventually, fire nearly ran out of food, but Bear and his people were too far ahead to hear its cries. Man, walking nearby, heard fire's demands to be fed. Answering its call, man asked fire what it liked to eat. Telling him sticks of all kind, man picked up a branch after branch, feeding fire until it was happy again. Man was able to warm himself by its side, so when Bear and his people returned, fire grew angry, feeling abandoned. It raged, driving them all away, and ever since, fire has belonged to man. From the Sahaptin Salashan tribes, the story describes the birth of the Columbia River. Coyote, who seemingly could not be satisfied, would ask of the clouds for shade one day when he was too hot. A cloud provided shade, but this was not enough, and Coyote only asked for more clouds. More clouds came, but Coyote then asked for rain. The clouds gave him rain, so Coyote asked for more rain. He was given a downpour, and this still does not satisfy him. Coyote then asked for a creek to bathe his feet, so a creek grew beside him. Still not happy, he stepped in, saying it should be deeper. So the creek grew deeper, huge, becoming a river, and Coyote was swept away by the water. Luckily, he survived and drifted ashore, only nearly drowned, but alive nonetheless. Another Inuit myth takes place long ago when man was hunting for seals to feed his wife and son. The herd he approached saw him coming and quickly slipped away. However, a single seal was moving far slower, and man regained hope. Unfortunately, this last seal escaped his grasp as well at the very last minute, and man was overcome with a strange feeling. Salty water began coming from his eyes, and the loud noises he made were heard by his son, who called woman. When woman and son arrived, they ran to man, and he explained what had transpired. They too began to have the strange water flow from their eyes. The three cried together, and this is how humans first learned to weep. A couple weeks ago, we discussed Anansi the spider and the different forms that storytelling has taken. During that conversation, I briefly mentioned the influence of the African diaspora and how stories and beliefs that originated in Africa traveled with slaves to different parts of the world, developing into different interpretations of the same story. Several have been gathered into various collections of African American folklore and the likes of Uncle Remus's Tales or The People Who Could Fly by Virginia Hamilton. Many of those stories involved Brer Rabbit, one of the inspirations for the animated classic Bugs Bunny. In a Georgia folktale, one story explores the antagonistic relationship between Brer Fox and his nemesis Brer Rabbit. Brer Fox hated Brer Rabbit, who had a habit of scheming and bossing everyone around, and he was determined to capture and kill Rabbit no matter what. One day, Brer Fox came up with a plan and decided to make a tar baby using a mixture of turpentine to sculpt a cute baby-like figure. Sticking a hat on his construct, he sat her in the middle of the road for Brer Rabbit to find, while he himself hid in the bushes and waited. Eventually, Brer Rabbit spotted the tar baby and took it upon himself to greet the creature. However, when she did not respond, he grew angry and offended. After repeatedly trying to get some sort of reaction, only to receive nothing, Brer Rabbit believed Tar Baby to be stuck up and eventually lost his temper. Striking her without another thought, he quickly realized his paw was now stuck. Brer Rabbit only grew angrier, continuing to yell at the Tar Baby, kicking with both feet and finally headbutting her, becoming completely stuck. This was when Brer Fox finally revealed himself, pleased with what he had done and grinning from ear to ear. Knowing he had at last been outdone, Brer Rabbit pleaded with Brer Fox to not be thrown into the briar patch. At first, Fox considered roasting Rabbit, but realized that was too much trouble, so considered hanging him instead. Rabbit begged him to do either, as long as Fox did not throw him into the briar patch. But Fox realized he had no strength, so considered drowning him instead. Rabbit again begged him to do any of the above, as long as Fox did not throw him into the briar patch. Fox thought about it and decided that the briar patch was indeed a wonderful idea, believing that Rabbit would be torn to pieces. He picked up his tar-covered foe and tossed him straight into the briar patch. Rabbit screamed as he landed in the bushes with a loud crash, followed by silence. For a while, Fox listened for signs of pain or struggle, but nothing. Finally, he heard someone call his name. He turned around to find Brer Rabbit sitting atop a hill, smiling smugly. Fox was unfortunately unaware that his friend, Brer Rabbit, had been both born and raised in the briar patch. It was practically his second home. In a story by S.E. Schlosser, Bobby Hansen was the best poker player in the county. His luck with women wasn't as successful, and he had several failed engagements. Bobby's pa felt sorry for him, and one day had a talk with an old woman who pulled a barge through the swamp. She had a daughter who was looking to get married, and the old woman thought Bobby would do nicely. His pa agreed. At first, Bobby was hesitant, but his pa dragged him to the dance to meet the young woman anyway. As soon as Bobby laid eyes on her, he was instantly in love. They ended up dancing the night away in one another's embrace. When sunrise came, Bobby was ready to go before the visiting priest and be married to the girl from the swamp right away. She suggested they go before the judge to be married instead, and Bobby finally agreed, though it would have been closer and quicker to see the priest. They were wed by the next day. They made their way to the cottage Bobby rented, and after the meal she prepared for him, he fell asleep, not waking until early the next morning, when his new wife snuck into bed hot and sweaty. Upset she had left their home on their wedding night, he questioned her, but she snapped at him in response. Her eyes grew emblazoned by his interrogation, and he immediately backed down, afraid. Their life took on a strange pattern then. Their days were normal, his wife kind and loving, while their nights were an entirely different story. She refused to come to bed at night, only just before dawn when he was already asleep. She would always be sweaty and in an unpleasant mood, refusing to answer any of Bobby's questions. Bobby was, of course, upset by all of this and sought advice from his pa. Since the priest had already left by this point, his pa sent him to visit a local conjure woman who was an herbalist that knew all about hoodoo magic. She was the one to treat local illnesses since the doctor was miles away. After hearing Bobby's story, the conjure woman told him to fake being asleep one night and instead follow his wife, reporting everything she did back to the conjure woman. The next evening, he did so. Following his wife to the attic, he watched her through the cracked door as she removed her skin at the spinning wheel, leaving her red muscles and pulsing blue veins exposed. She then leaped out of the window and flew off into the night. Understandably terrified, Bobby grew physically sick. He was still horrified when she returned and crept into bed that following morning, back to her seemingly normal self. When he reported all of this to the conjure woman, she informed him he had married a boo hag, a type of witch and shapeshifter who lures men, eventually delivering him to her boo daddy who devours their flesh and bones. Warning Bobby that he must act fast, she instructed him to find blue paint, and once his wife had left the house, spread it on every window and door frame, making sure it was 2 coats thick. This would prevent the boo hag from entering the home. This would also prevent her from re-entering her skin, which, if she didn't do before dawn, would leave her trapped and exposed for what she was. To that end, the conjure woman instructed that he leave a single window unpainted, then fill her skin with salt and pepper, which would burn her alive from the inside out once she put it back on. Bobby agreed to do exactly that. That night, Bobby did as he was told. When his wife finally returned, she flew from window to door, burning herself as she touched the blue paint, testing one after another, trying to find a way in. Finally, she found the single open window and squeezed through, trying to get in her skin just in time. She succeeded, only to discover that the salt and pepper had begun eating away at her before she eventually exploded. Bobby was once again single, yet this time he was no longer in desperate need to find a wife. He found he had come to rather enjoy the bachelor life after all he had been through. In a Maryland ghost story by S.E. Schlossler, a plantation master who supported the Confederate president committed to sending as many supplies to the Southern Army as he could. At first, things went well, until Yankee soldiers began destroying the master's supply line, and he believed one of his slaves was a traitor, giving the enemy army information. He discovered it was, in fact, a female slave named Big Liz, a rather large woman capable of single-handedly picking up 2 full-size pigs on her own. She was more than capable of taking him out if he confronted her directly and chose to fight back. So he instead came up with a different plan, asking her to help him with a special job. The lie he told her was that the President, Jefferson Davis, had given him a large chest of gold and he needed her to help him bury the thing where no Yankee soldier could ever find it. Big Liz happily agreed. She was forced to carry the heavy trunk for miles into the swamp before then digging a hole to bury it. Master only watched as she toiled, he himself resting comfortably. After she had dug for hours, he finally declared it was deep enough and ordered her to pull the war chest down until it fell at her feet. Before she could climb out of the hole, he stopped her, calling her a traitor and a Yankee spy. The master swung his sword at Big Liz, completely cutting off her head before burying his traitorous slave. He wanted to bury her head along with her body, but his overzealousness caused it to be flung somewhere he couldn't see in the dark of the swamp. He told himself the local wildlife would take care of it and dismissed the thought for the time being. Making his way back home, however, he found himself overcome with the sensation that someone was watching him. The audible sound of footsteps soon followed, and the man grew filled with terror and dread over thoughts of all manner of supernatural beings. The master took off running towards home as fast as his legs could carry him, panicking the whole way. When he finally reached his backyard, stumbling to what he believed was a safe place, he was met by a massive soil-covered figure, engulfed by blue flames. He was all but distracted by the rank odor of her decaying form, until his eyes were first drawn to her stump of a neck, and then the laughing head she was carrying under her arm. The phantom of Big Liz towered over the man, now cowering in fear on the ground at her feet. Sitting her head down, she picked up her former master by his collar before silently snapping his neck, dropping his body there beneath his bedroom window. Collecting her severed head, Big Liz faded into the night, and legend says that her ghost can still be seen roaming the swampland near her former home on the anniversary of her death. Some believe it still defends the Confederate war chest she buried from anyone foolish enough to seek it out. And lastly, The People Could Fly by Virginia Hamilton tells the story of how many African people once had the ability to fly prior to being captured and sold into slavery. During this transition, they somehow not only lost their wings, but the memories they ever had these powers. A young woman named Sarah is working the field with her baby on her back, both exhausted, and the infant begins to cry, attracting the attention of the overseer. He whips both mother and child until she collapses. Broken, an elderly man named Toby appears, reigniting Sarah's sleeping powers. The pair take off into the clouds without another thought, escaping to freedom. The following afternoon, other slaves are found working, struggling to not collapse from the heat. Toby again appears, whispering the powerful magic word to each in turn, returning their gift of flight as well. Each flies away, free once more. The slave masters return to see what has happened, and Toby shouts the words one final time, hoping to reawaken any stragglers before he himself flies away. The story ends with a number of slaves remaining behind, still unable to fly. Though they would be left continuing to suffer for some time, the stories and knowledge of those who could fly would give them hope that they would eventually be free. I know that was a lot. These stories can get pretty deep pretty fast. Though I've only talked about a few tonight, each had significant meaning or expressed some heavy theme. Many of the Native American lore, like others from around the world, serve to explain why things are the way they are, while the African American tales often serve to express the struggles of slaves against their masters and the difficulties surviving everyday life. Even the stories of Brer Rabbit are believed to be analogies, inspirational tales of the seemingly weak overcoming the more powerful with cleverness. Each has their place in history, and each held its purpose shaping the people around them. For that reason, I believe it is of the utmost importance that we continue to pass them on. Next week, we will be talking about the many faces of magic and ritual. For now, Assalamu alaikum and Namaste. Peace be with you until we meet again. Thanks for listening to me as I've nerded out about stories and beliefs. Join me next week as I journey down the rabbit hole once again by subscribing and listening wherever podcasts are available. Who knows, maybe then we'll be one step closer to glimpsing the true nature of faith and fear. Music for this podcast is brought to you by Delo1954X and Toby Lane from Pixabay.com.